Joining me now is Lior Sternfeld, Associate Professor of History and Jewish Studies at Penn State University, and back with me, MSNBC political analyst Eddie Glaude Jr. He's also the James S. McDonnell Distinguished University Professor at Princeton University. Gentlemen, thank you to the both for joining us. Professor Sternfeld, I'd like to start with you. You probably saw right before the break, I played that soundbite of Cornell Law School Professor William Jacobson connecting anti-Semitism with the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction movement, and criticism of Israel. As a professor of Jewish studies, what do you make of that stance and that argument?
Look, I completely disagree with the idea that supporting BDS is in and of itself a form of anti-Semitism. University campuses should provide the space, the safe space for students to feel, to be able to have open and honest conversation about Israel and Palestine. Universities have been trying to avoid assuming any kind of intellectual leadership role, and they created spaces that are not welcoming, and students and professors should feel that their identity is not under attack. And the BDS is one form. I have many disagreements with the tactics of the BDS movement. I agree with some points of it, but this is not anti-Semitism.
Right.
By defining this as anti-Semitism, we're losing sight of the real danger of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, the brushing of broad strokes of criticism and discussions, difficult conversations that need to be had as just simply being anti-Semitic. Professor Glaude, we've seen attempts in the past to stifle conversations at universities, whether it's trying to discredit CRT or Black history or banning books. We see that now manifest in a different form. What is at stake here if we cannot have open and honest conversations, no matter how difficult they are, about Israel's aggressions on Gaza or its broader treatment of Palestinians in this precise moment?
Well, it's a reflection of the contraction of the space for everyday ordinary people to engage in the kinds of debates that are necessary for the country to move forward. If democracy don't have vibrant, deliberative spaces where people with different views, Ayman, can come and have disagreements without resorting to violence, then democracy itself is in jeopardy. Look, we've talked about Cornell, we've talked about Cooper Union, we've mentioned Columbia, there's been mention of Drexel and Pennsylvania. There are over 4,000 four-year degree granting institutions, colleges and universities in the country, over 4,000, over 6,000, nearly 6,000 generally. And what we do know is that across college campuses, folks are having hard conversations. Some protests are civil, some are not so civil. And what we see is an attempt to stifle debate, and it's being, I think, yoked to this political view that universities and college campuses are these hotbeds of illiberalism. Right before the Israel-Hamas war exploded, there was all of this talk about viewpoint diversity in universities and colleges. And what did they mean by that? They meant that conservative voices weren't allowed to speak. You couldn't say certain things because political correctness and whatnot. And now we see the very opposite here. And so we need to understand this as a feature of the contraction of deliberative space in the United States that is in some ways a feature of the crisis that we face as a democracy.
Professor Sternfeld, I wanted to share something with you and get your thoughts on it. And this is from Jerusalem Post editor Avi Meir, somebody who is frequently on our network here. He wrote a piece titled No Longer Part of Us, about who belongs in the Jewish community in this moment. And he writes, quote, "The prominence of visibly Jewish anti-Zionists in the ongoing flood of bile and opprobrium targeting the Jewish state in the aftermath of the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust should repulse us all. There have been thousands, and we should note, thousands of Jewish people taking to the streets in support of Palestinians across the world." Is he saying that there are no longer there's no longer room, or they no longer belong in the Jewish community and the religion because they have taken this position to support Palestinian rights? How do you feel about that?
Well, he is saying this, and this is part of them trying to redraw the boundaries of who belongs and who cannot belong. Nobody will tell me that I'm Jewish enough or not Jewish enough. I believe that there is Jewish moral and Jewish values. My values, my Jewish compass shows me that I need to oppose dehumanization and war crimes, regardless of who committing it. Everyone should be appalled by this kind of rejection of universal values and pushing out Jews who try to speak out. This is totally unacceptable, and I hope that the American Jewish community that allowed, at least until now, more of an open discussion. I hope that the American Jewish community will respond to this kind of statement, of appalling statement.
Professor Eddie Glaude, I want to get your thoughts on the administrations of these universities. And you rightfully pointed out we have 4,000 and plus universities. So many times the universities are seen through the lens of academia and the discussion. But at the same time, we know that there's a lot of pressure that is put on universities from the boards, from donors, from people outside. And we've seen that laced in this conversation. Who's donating to these universities? Money coming from the Arab Gulf that's somehow tainting these universities and making them no longer independent. Give me your thoughts on what the role of the administration of these universities are here in terms of protecting the students, making sure that students have a safe place to learn, but also maintaining their independence from outside influence and money.
Yeah, it's very difficult. They have to be stewards of the mission and vision of their institutions. And that involves, of course, dealing with boards and their donor base. And for public institutions, that's a very complicated notion, right? And it also has to do with protecting, providing the space for their students to become the kinds of people that they're growing up to be. So it's a very difficult challenge. But I was sitting here thinking, Ayman, as we were talking, about my role as a teacher, as a professor. I'm supposed to ask difficult questions. And the difficult question that I have to ask is this one. Yes, there was evil evidenced on October 7th. Evil, yes. But does that evil, the fact that Israel experienced it, does it then give it license to act with impunity, to act beyond the bounds of international law without moral constraint? Another question I would ask as a professor, how should the Palestinians respond if BDS is evil and it's nonviolent? If the March to Return was evil and it's nonviolent, how are they to fight, to resist? And those are questions that you set the context for students to fight and grapple, right? But it seems to me that we are locked in this semiotic cage where we can't think outside of a certain set of assumptions without being labeled as being hate. Remember, Dr. King rejected the riots. He rejected violence, but he understood the cause. He denounced the violence, but he stood in solidarity with the cause. You don't have to agree with Nat Turner to understand why he did what he did. And so this is part of the work that we have to do on college campuses and avoid all of the hyperbole and the vitriol that is kind of defining how we're going about our business as we educate our students.
We are certainly grateful for both of you and for what you're trying to do on your college campuses. I hope that we can continue this conversation. I know this is a conversation that we're going to need to keep having time and time again as the tragedy in the Middle East continues to play out. Professor Eddie Glaude, Professor Lior Sternfeld, can't thank you enough for your time and your insights. Thank you.